Parallel Lives. I'm Dimmer, and this is my co-host, Levi.
Yo.
Today we're joined by Taylor, a recent high school graduate from Canada. And we're going to be talking about Parallel Lives. The study, not the podcast. This is actually the paper that the podcast is named after. Parallel Lives, a phenomenological study of the lived experience of maladaptive daydreaming by Somer, and Jopp. This paper is not, it's not like a study where you get like statistics and hard numbers and stuff. I think it's more qualitative.
I like reading studies like that because I can get more like personal with it. And it's not more like numbers and facts and all these graphs and stuff, you know?
Like, I like all the studies. I do love the stats. I love being able to say like 27% of people do this. But that's like all I can do with it. Because you know, they always show their data. They show the charts and stuff, but I can't read them. I was like, yep, that sure is a lot of dots. And they sort of point downwards. Just to say in the study's own words what it is trying to accomplish, it says in the first paragraph, in this study, we aim to explore the phenomena of maladaptive daydreaming, a psychological condition described as extensive fantasy activity that replaces human interaction and or interferes with academic, interpersonal, or vocational functioning. We'll just jump right into it. So instead of going straight to discussions, though, I wanted to go to method first, because under the participants area, it says we advertised a call for participants on several internet forums, which, I mean, is the only place, especially when this was written, that you could find maladaptive daydreamers.
Yeah.
But to indicate whether they were a maladaptive daydreamer or not, they gave them all a screening paragraph. All right, it's kind of a lot, but I'm going to read it and just see if you would have said yes to this. For the purposes of the study, we define daydreaming as fantastical mental images and visual stories or narratives that are not currently part of your life. Therefore, we are not referring to such acts as reminiscing over past events, planning for future activities, such as mentally preparing for a meeting with your boss or thinking about your mental to-do list. We are also not including sexual fantasies in this study. Here are some examples of daydreams that can be included. Hanging out with a favorite celebrity, winning a gold medal in the Olympics, unless you're an Olympic level athlete. I love that they qualified that. Telling off your boss after winning the lottery, or having an affair with an attractive coworker who isn't the slightest bit interested in you. Living in a parallel fantasy world, engaging in heroic or rescue actions, speaking with historical figures. Any daydreams involving fictional characters or plots should also be included. Maladaptive daydreaming is defined as extensive in terms of duration or frequency, and very vivid daydreaming that can be experienced as addictive. And it replaces human interaction and or interferes with academic, interpersonal, or vocational functioning and or creates emotional distress. According to this definition, your daydreaming is normal or maladaptive?
I would say that mine is definitely maladaptive because every day I daydream about celebrities, like fictional worlds, usually shows. So I like Game of Thrones and stuff. So I will like daydream being in those scenarios with these characters that are like pre-existing. And I don't really have many daydreams that have to do with like me living my dream life or me doing this and that in the real world. It's always like taking place in like a fantasy kind of setting, or at least in a setting that is like opposite to my world. So yeah, I would say I'm a maladaptive daydreamer.
Yeah, I do have those other kinds of daydreams too, but I consider those normal. Like the maladaptive daydreaming is totally separate. And for me, that's all completely made up.
Yeah.
Oh, I definitely have maladaptive daydreaming. I can relate to a lot of things on the if you call it symptom list, and especially when it comes to the distressing factor of it, I feel like I'm dissociating most of the time, where real life feels like a simulation. And sometimes, I get these moments when I'm on Discord and I'm talking to people where I become extremely paranoid because I suddenly realize that the people who I'm talking to are actual real people somewhere in the world, as silly as that sounds. But other than that, I live in my head. My current hyperfixation is a game, and I myself am just in that game world. I am not in the real world, and yeah, it's not very nice. I mean, it's nice when you're daydreaming, but it's not nice when you have responsibilities as an adult. And I live alone, so and having to do a lot of chores, work, socializing sometimes. It's hard, man. It's it's not something that I want. I'd much rather be an immersive daydreamer than a maladaptive daydreamer. So yeah.
They ended up with 21 people. 25 people had responded, but like only 21 went through with the study for whatever reason. They were from a few different countries, and they were well, it's pretty good age range. It goes from like 18 to 40, 42.
So we got a pretty decent range of different people living different parts of their lives.
Yeah. We have that too. We have that too. I'm in my 30s and you're a very young adult.
Yeah, I literally just turned 18 a month ago. Like my birthday was in July. So,
Oh, mine too. Leo.
yeah, I'm a Cancer.
Oh my gosh, we went ahead and Googled phenomenology and they actually define it in the next part. I really need to pay more attention to my notes. Phenomenology seeks to examine phenomena from the perspective of first-hand accounts and through the life world of people. I don't know what a life world is.
Yeah, that's a new word that I got to add to my dictionary.
Yeah. So they're going to shed some light on the experiential essence of this psychological phenomena. They sort of ended up with three master themes: necessary conditions, contents, and experiential properties. So in sort of going through the findings and stuff, we're going to touch on those kind of things.
Okay.
Yeah. First up, the maladaptation. Many described a vicious cycle in which they sought comfort from their stressors, only to experience further distress, which they eased with more daydreaming. That is a bit paraphrased. I don't want to like take up too much of the podcast with reading directly from the paper, but so yeah, just keep in mind I'm like paraphrasing a lot of this. You get stuck in that cycle?
Actually, pretty recently I've been in like this lazy slump. Like my parents always harp on me for being lazy and not doing anything. I'm not getting a job. I'm not doing this and that. And I just feel like a failure, but I kind of like just spend all my days daydreaming because it makes me feel better, even though I know it's like negatively impacting me. And it's just like this endless cycle of, well, this thing is, detrimentally affecting me every day, but I am just going to keep doing it because it feels good.
That's actually kind of exactly what one of the interviewees said. Oh gosh, nothing gets done. Homework, studying, cleaning. Sometimes I lie there and my stomach will be growling and hurting because I won't get out of bed. I'm trying to daydream.
Yeah, and that especially hits home because at the end she mentioned just laying there in her bed. And when I daydream, I like sit up in my bed and I rock back and forth for like hours. So sometimes I literally do not get out of bed because that is where I daydream.
Does that sound like you?
Oh yeah, I think this is actually something I highlighted as well because it definitely is. I feel like MD helps us with coping with real life stuff, and it's nice, right? It feels good to daydream and to be happy in your mind and stuff like that. But at the same time, it's so disruptive and destructive that it's like Yeah, it's this weird power balance, you know. I remember reading a quote from the paper where in the intro paragraph there was a thing that said that there were like two types of daydreaming, where one was like sort of conscious and the other one was sort of subconscious, but it was called something specific. I feel like that's the way that it is for MD, where when I choose to daydream, I feel like, you know, maladaptive daydreaming is then really enjoyable and it's really nice to experience. But when it's something that's sort of uncontrollable, where it just sort of happens when I need to work or focus, that's when it becomes a really big problem. So I definitely do have that best of both worlds, for a lack of a better term, when it comes to MD.
Yeah. It's definitely a cycle I used to get stuck in, but it's one that I've learned now that I'm much older to like recognize and purposely try to break out of. But I remember when my MD was at its height, that was exactly what would happen. And I'd be like, spend all my time in my room daydreaming. And then when I come out, I'm like, oh, shoot, I have no friends because like I never spend time with anyone. And then just go back to my room and start daydreaming again. Rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's another quote in here that I feel like really sounded like me. That was like, I feel like a ghost that misses out on life. The stronger my fears get, the more depressed I become, and then I need to daydream to make myself feel better. It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, like for me, I don't know. I also went through like a lot of trauma recently, and I basically cut everyone off. So now I'm in this like space where daydreaming has become like my everyday life rather than, talking to a friend or doing something productive. I'm just talking to people in my head because I find it safer there, because I can, in a way, control these characters and make them like me. So I don't ever feel like they're going to abandon me. And it's just this big, endless cycle every day.
I feel like also another thing to add to that is, I think later on in the paper, someone also said something about this, but the feeling of sort of just like, I usually describe it to people as life doesn't feel very real. It sort of feels like I'm living in a simulation where my daydreams feel way more real in terms of visualizations and hell, maybe even, you know, relationships and stuff like that, or stuff that I can hear in my daydreams versus real life just seems to be kind of like strange. It's like that brain fog type of thing, you know? So I feel like I can relate to that as well. It's just sort of ghosting through life. Yeah.
And to like add on to that, this is a little TMI, but I struggle with drug addiction as well as maladaptive daydreaming. So I kind of see the parallels there when people say that daydreaming is an addiction, because I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of similarities here. But I feel like what really drew me to like substances in the first place is the fact that I could bring my daydreams into reality. And then I kind of got addicted to that because I was like, I can live life now, except it just feels like my daydreams. So, yeah, there are many endless cycles going on in my life, and I'm just trying to like cope with them all, but I'm young and I'm learning.
It's interesting that you actually mentioned like the drug addiction, because I'm in a very similar position as well, where I also have a substance addiction, and I mean I don't mind talking about it openly. But what I realized, and it's something that I tested with MD, is that when I'm addicted to something in life, then my MD sort of lessens, where it's almost like, all right, I'll just call it what it is. So I have a very big like weed addiction or marijuana addiction,
Same.
and likewise. So, you know, I reached a point where I was smoking weed like every 2 hours, you know, because one high lasts like 2 hours and then you're off of it. So for me, what happened is that my addiction to weed became sort of overpowered my daydreaming addiction, right? And then suddenly I had no more issues with maladaptive daydreaming. But then when I run out of weed and I can't get any more, then it's sort of like my MD just comes back full force. So I was thinking about it, and it's like it's very interesting coming from an addictive, point of view. It's like we need something to cling to, it's so strange to think about it that way. But that's just for me personally, where the two sort of cancel each other out. But yeah, it's just interesting that you mentioned that as well.
Yeah, and for me, a lot of the times, the two work together against me. So, I'll wake up one day and I'll go, well, I'm gonna try not to smoke. But then all of a sudden my brain's going, well, if you smoke, your daydreams are just gonna be a million times better. So then I kind of like smoke to daydream, and then it just becomes like repetitive every day, just doing this just to like make one disorder feel good.
Yeah, makes sense to me. It's very relatable what you're saying as well. Like I feel like anything that amplifies the daydreams would also have a similar effect. But
Yeah.
yeah.
It just kind of goes on to say at the end of this little section that the need for change was prevalent. Apparently, most it doesn't say how many, but enough to note of the people were just fed up and done with it and ready to get their life back on track. And they were saying things like, "It's really a nightmare now. I wish I could move on. It served its purpose in getting me through my childhood, but as an adult, I'd like to live a life that I like, and it's keeping me from having a life." Do those like quotes resonate with either of you guys?
Yeah, with me, I had a really tough time in high school. So I was bullied every year in school, no matter the grade. I always would make a friend every year and then lose them in like this catastrophic breakup. And I really used my daydreaming to like cope through all of that, and it did help me. And it also made me more creative in a sense where I was getting involved in school, even though I freaking hated it there. I was still making plays, I was acting, writing. It just made me feel comfortable when I needed that comfort. But now that I'm 18, I'm out of school and everyone's asking me, are you going to university? Like, are you gonna actually get a job for once? Are you gonna get up and do anything? And I'm just like, no. I'm just gonna lay here and daydream. So, but I find it hard to call it a nightmare or a curse. Like, I've come close to it. I sometimes say that daydreaming is like this blessing. Like, in all the stories, the gods give these blessed people gifts, and they may not see the value in this gift because maybe it like brings them hardships, but there's really a meaning behind it. And that's kind of how I saw my maladaptive daydreaming, as like, ooh, like my superpower. But now I'm like, no, it's pretty destructive. But because I have this like connection to it, and I've for so long been like, oh, well, this is my thing. This is what makes me who I am. I'm like, oh, is it a nightmare? Am I living a nightmare? It's just really hard to like come to terms with that this might actually be a bad thing. So I'm starting to recognize like all the cons of daydreaming. It's just very difficult to face it because for so long I've been like, ooh, this is a blessing.
Yeah, there is absolutely a lot of conflict there with that. Even and I'm going through that still. I know we already touched on like the addiction and stuff. I don't have any other addictions, but I had this weird. Well, actually, I'm a smoker. Anyway, I had this weird conversation with a psychologist who I was like on a radio show with, and he called me after. and we chatted about some stuff. And the first thing he asked as soon as he got on the phone with me was like, "All right, which one of your parents was the alcoholic?" I was like, "God damn it!"
Oh.
I was like, "Yeah, okay, you got me." For a minute there, I thought he might be onto something because he was saying things that make sense and things that make sense with what this paper just said. You know, it served its purpose in getting me through my childhood, but as an adult, I'd like to live the life that I want, which is exactly my experience. It was the worst, you know, in my worst years growing up, not just as a small child, but through high school as well. But now I'm an adult and it's outgrown its purpose. I just want to live my life. So he was like, we would expect you, having heard your story, we would expect you to also be an alcoholic or be married to one. And my husband is not. We don't drink. He's wonderful. So he's like, so why didn't you fall into that trap? And I have to assume, well, because the daydreaming was my drug that protected me from other things. And then, but then he was like, look up the laundry list of the adult children of alcoholics, and you will see that it is you exactly. So I looked it up, and it's not. For a minute, I thought he was on to something, but when I looked it up, that's just not me. I don't have most of those behaviors, and the ones that I do have, like, they're not super strong or anything. So I really don't think it's that. But anyway, the stuff he said before that, it all kind of meshed together really well. It was a really weird experience. And I feel that the participant who said this was called IJ. I feel you, IJ.
I was just thinking, it's sort of a jump from the topic of addiction, but also, you know, talking about the daydreams serving their purpose. Now it just gets to a point where it's like, you know, we want to focus on stuff like work and, you know, things that are really, really important. Where it's like, you know, when we're younger, when we're in school, we have, well, I don't know if, I mean, I'm just talking from personal experience here, but I had a lot more freedom and a lot more time to waste away. Where now it's like, you know, I have to work, I have to do things, I have to get stuff done, and I'm just not getting stuff done. And whenever I explain it to people, it's so funny because people are always like, okay, well, you just have to be, you know, you just have to be strict with yourself. You just have to force yourself to do this stuff. And it's like, well, it's easy to say that, you know, but as a maladaptive daydreamer, it's so strange. It's like, I always tell people, it's like my mind has a mind of its own, you know? Like it's so difficult to just tell myself, no, I need to stop or I need to focus on work or whatever, because, well, for one, you know, it's maladaptive daydreaming, but the second part is just that it's still giving me that bit of, you know, serotonin and dopamine and whatever you want to call it, which when you have to do work and chores and things like that, you don't get that same feelings, you know. But now it's like it's become a problem. And sometimes sometimes I'd sit in front of my PC and I wouldn't be able to work for hours, and then I just tell myself, this is a problem. Like I need to figure these things out. So yeah, I definitely yeah. MD as a whole.
The next section goes over the necessary conditions for MD. Almost all participants described a ritualized daydreaming initiation process that involved movement, music, or both. Do you guys have necessary conditions?
Yes. So, as I've stated earlier, the way I daydream is I'll just lay in my bed or sit up in my bed actually and just rock back and forth. Sometimes I'll like switch it up, like I'll daydream in a car, or you know, when I'm daydreaming in a car, I don't mind when other people are around so long as they're not trying to talk to me. Then I just get anxious and I stop. When I'm walking my dog, I can daydream, but as soon as I see someone coming, I like stop. But with my daydreams, I have to have music playing. I have to have my phone in my hand. the whole time, so I can just quickly look at it and switch the song if I want to. But I just need to be like physically holding my phone, which is weird because like when I try to hold anything else, I'm like, no, I can't do this. But yeah, I have to rock back and forth. And if there's anyone else in the room, I cannot daydream at all. But when I was living with this girl for a bit, we had a really toxic relationship. And every night I would have to sleep in her bed because she needed like the comfort of someone being there that she trusted because she was going through all this like trauma. And I just stopped daydreaming for months and it drove me insane. But I couldn't daydream because, well, number one, she's in the bed. And number two, I just have like this, I don't know, shame, not even shame per se, because I'm very open about my maladaptive daydreaming disorder, but it's just more, it's too vulnerable for me to show other people. Like rocking back and forth, zoned out, making facial expressions. I don't want anyone to see me like that. So that's like my routine. I have to have like those conditions or else I won't daydream at all.
What happens to you if you don't do that? Like if you go a day without music, what happens to you?
Well, when I was living with that girl, I didn't really daydream at all. Like, I think I daydreamed 2 or 3 times. And that was because she had went out to party all those times. But it did drive me insane. I'm not going to like sugarcoat it. I went crazy off the walls because on top of my maladaptive daydreaming, I have my addictions and then I have an assumed borderline personality disorder. So I have like those like uncontrollable moods. And when everything just feels like it's crashing down on me, I just implode. So I had like 2 mental breakdowns there that were so bad. She had a big role to play in them. Like she would make fun of me the whole time and just be like really toxic and abusive. But I realized that like without daydreaming, without that coping mechanism, I could not handle my other disorders. I could not handle my thoughts because my thoughts are always racing. I have like 20 different voices talking in my head all at once. And on top of that, I am visually seeing like different scenes in my head always. So it just became too much for me to handle because I was not expressing those thoughts in like my way, which was daydreaming.
What about you, Levi? Do you have necessary conditions that like have to be met for you to daydream?
For me, not really anymore. I used to have full body rhythmic movement disorder, but then I sort of forced myself out of that when I moved out of my parents' house. But nowadays, it's like when I guess it depends. You know, I can walk to the store and then in public, my thoughts will just they'll just be running away with me, but I wouldn't be daydreaming full on in the same way as I would when I'm alone in my room, for example. But now, you know, I relate a lot to what's been said with the whole living with someone thing, especially because when I was in a relationship with someone about 2 years ago, it was an absolute nightmare because back then I didn't know what maladaptive daydreaming was or that it existed. And I just like this person, I kept telling them, you know, I don't know what's going on. Sometimes I'll zone out and it would appear that I'm not here, but I am. And it drove me absolutely mad to just be around someone or be in someone else's space all the time, you know, with no separation to be alone or anything like that. So I guess I would say being alone to have the proper deep daydreams, you know. Otherwise it's just the superficial repeating type of daydreams when I'm in public. But yeah, for the proper daydreams, for the vivid, intense stuff, I would definitely say that I need to be alone. And music is also a very, very big factor that plays into that, especially, you know, like having a phone nearby or playing Spotify. I would also just skip through songs depending on whatever I'm imagining. So Yeah, I guess I could say music and being alone. Movement, not so much anymore, but those two, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction you made there because I can definitely daydream without any of that stuff. But it's like you said, it's not as deep or fulfilling.
So actually, well, I have a question for you though. In living with someone like, let's say, you live with your husband, does that have any effect on how you feel about not being able to daydream, or do you just daydream anyway, or what goes on in that setup?
Yeah.
If I mean, you don't have to answer.
No,
I
I'm just
was
trying to
just
think of
curious.
how to answer because, yeah, it does impact. But see, I didn't know what MD was when I met him. So, and weirdly, it makes a lot of life choices for you. But I remember one that I made. So I don't listen to music anymore. I couldn't. It was too powerful. But I daydream just fine without it. Like it turns out that is not a necessary condition for me. but but back then I would listen to music constantly and I would wear my headphones in bed and just listen all night and daydream all night. But when I started dating the boyfriend that would turn out to be my husband, I couldn't do that. I can't just sit there with my headphones on full blast listening to music all night with someone sleeping next to me. And I very, very seriously considered dumping him. Like that's how important the MD. I didn't know it was MD at the time, but that's how important it was to me. I would throw away a relationship for it. But I don't know, how old was I? I was in my 20s when we met, so I was kind of at the point where I was like starting to be like, okay, no, like I need to make a change. I need to do something. So I remember making the conscious decision that no, I'm going to see this relationship out. I will get through it, without the headphones. It'll be fine. And it worked out in that case. I did end up marrying him. But it was a hard decision. It was a hard decision, him or headphones. And additionally, like I picked a mate that values his personal time like as much as I do. My husband has his own hobbies. He likes to spend time alone or with his friends, not attached to his partner's hip. And because that was a value that I shared, it made him more attractive as like a dating prospect. So that's just another, weirdly, MD is one of the reasons like our relationship worked out. We both had our free time, me to daydream and him to, I don't know, do whatever he does. But yeah, so I don't know. It weirdly, I arranged my life to facilitate daydreaming. And I don't regret how it turned out. I have a good relationship with my husband. I have a good marriage. We have a son now and he's great. So it did all work out fine. But a lot of the early parts of our relationship were built, unbeknownst to him, around my daydreaming.
I think that's why my relationship with that girl did not work out whatsoever because we were side by side all day, every day, to the point where like we kind of like merged into one person. So I was like unable to daydream and I didn't really want to, even though like my brain was just going daydream, daydream, because I was so attached to this person that I was like, well, I can't do this for them, so I'm just not going to do it. But it cost me my sanity, pretty much. I didn't know how to handle it at all. Just head first into like not daydreaming for months on end it was insanity for me.
One thing they mention, okay, this is just sort of a little throwaway. Well, I don't know if there's any throwaway lines in a scientific study, but one thing they kind of said was our respondents haphazardly discovered that movement helped them set the empty process in motion. And I kind of honed in on haphazardly because come to think of it, I mean, I'm not a pacer, so I have no idea. I don't have the repetitive motion. But is that something like do you remember discovering that, or was it so like early on in the process you just have no idea how you knew that you could trigger daydreaming? by doing that?
Huh. Well, I mean, I'm trying to remember because I actually don't really know how exactly I started rocking back and forth in my bed. I think I remember being like in preschool, like grade 2, and I figured out that, if I rocked back and forth, I could be in animes that I really liked. And I don't remember the exact moment that, it came to me, which is very strange. It kind of bothers me. I want to know where it came from, but a part of it was also the fact that we just had rocking chairs. So I think that might have played a role into it, like just rocking back and forth. But I can't say for sure where my mannerisms have come from, but it's a very interesting topic.
You were definitely a mover as a child, Levi. Do you remember, or did it just start so young? You don't remember attaching it to daydreams?
I actually asked my mother about this, and she also doesn't really know. I mean, I didn't go through a traumatic childhood. Like, I didn't have any abuse or whatever going on, but it might have been related to subconscious things, I suppose. I don't really know how to say it, but I yeah, I don't know. It's it's a bit messy, but I don't know if this is TMI, but uh, when I was supposed to be born, the doctor told my mother that it's way too early, and she was just like, "Bruh, I'm tired of being pregnant. Like, let's just get this over and done with." And I mean, I get it,
Oh
but I
yeah,
think that
mood. Been there.
yeah. So she was like, maybe that also played in the whole sort of the trauma bit, which, as a side note, that's not a thing that has to happen for people to have MD. But in regards to the movement and the rhythmic movement disorder, maybe that. And then my mother used to rock me a lot, like hold me in her arms and then just like sway me. So maybe it's that coupled with maybe some other small things that stuck with me, and just that feeling of comfort and of being soothed. I think that might have all just stuck with me.
That is not a connection I ever made before. That that it could start as young as infancy because people rock their babies quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean it's something interesting that she did mention, is that all of these things, they do add up. And she also mentioned that overall in life I am I'm pretty slow with literally everything I do. I really need to take my time in learning things and getting stuff done. So maybe just that feeling of comfort, like, yeah, I mean, like I said, it's not like I had restless legs or the head banging. It was full body, and it was like backwards and forwards and side to side, so it was the usual rocking movement. So yeah, it might have been that.
I always hear new things when we talk. The next segment of the paper goes over solitude versus motivated engagement. We kind of already touched on the first part of the solitude thing, but it goes on to say additional things like, well, let me just read from the paper. During boring meetings or when among strangers, as opposed to in situations in which they are motivated for higher level performance, MDers tend to drift off into fantasy. So it says, in a boring situation, we are more likely to daydream than if it's something engaging, which I don't know. I don't know if I feel that way about it. What about you guys? Are you more likely to daydream if it's something boring or if it's something engaging? Because I mean that sounds like obvious. Obviously, that makes sense. But I feel like there's another part to it where like the stress of something engaging or novel is also triggering. Maybe that's what it is for me. Maybe that's why that doesn't sound like me, because the stress adds a new component. I don't know. What about you guys?
I'm not sure because my thoughts are like always racing, not in like a daydream sense per se, but I when I'm like stimulated by like conversation, like when there's people around and like I don't know, I get this like urge to like be the center of attention, so my thoughts just start like racing with like things to say and stuff. I don't really like daydream in those moments. I just get like super hyper focused. And like especially if I'm doing like an engaging task, I'll get hyper focused, but if there's like music and stuff involved, like for example, if I'm like painting or drawing and there's music, I'm probably going to be zoning out, but I'll still be doing the task and I'll still be like pretty into it. When things are boring, yeah, definitely I tend to like drift off.
They actually go on to explain it too, that it can also be used as a method of coping with MD or curbing MD. That if you find something that's really engaging to you, you have the motivation to attend it, just as strong a motivation as you have to attend to your daydreams. That you could use that as a coping skill. They give the example of I took up quilting and noticed I did not daydream while quilting because it requires a lot of focus. And I do kind of do that. Like it's not that in these cases it's not that the task itself is particularly engaging. It's that you are motivated to attend to the task just as much. I do this, but not for the reason that the paper is saying. What I do is I try to occupy the part of my brain that daydreams. You know what? Actually, now I think about it more, maybe this isn't related to what they're talking about. It might be a completely different mental process, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. So, like, if I'm trying to get something done, something that's stupid and boring and that I would totally daydream through, like putting around, cleaning up my kitchen or whatever, what I'll do is I will turn on a podcast or a video or something just to have playing in the background, because it seems to take up the daydreaming space of my brain with, whatever I'm listening to, so that I can get the dishes done and stuff. I think I said this on another podcast, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. And I think it was Mom. Mom was like, wow, that's like an ADHD thing.
Usually when I'm doing something like engaging, in the moment I might be like super hyper focused and stuff, but after the event or after that like social interaction, I will just daydream about it and like how it felt and like kind of like weave that experience into my daydreams. So honestly, I think both my boring experiences and like things that have like been really engaging for me, they always just influence my daydreams. So even when I'm not like daydreaming while I'm doing it, it might like make its way into my daydreams. It's very, very peculiar.
I feel like I can relate to both of you. For me, I really relate to what Dimmer said with playing a podcast or just some video or something in the background, because that really does like stop the daydreaming. I never really thought about it. I only sort of realized it now when you said it, but that's true. I'm an artist, so I am not bothered by going into my daydreaming phases whenever I draw, because I'm still focused on what I'm doing, regardless of my mind going off and going crazy. But I have found that when I play, let's say, a podcast in the background that stops me from daydreaming, I work way longer. So I can focus way longer on the task at hand than I would if I were, let's say, listening to music and my daydreams were going off, because then my brain would just be like, okay, more daydreaming, so it would eventually reach a stage where I'm like, okay, time to take a break after like 30 minutes. But regarding boring tasks and things like that, absolutely, my mind is just gone. That's why I had such a tough time during school, is because during school, during university, I just did not care about any of the classes and I just didn't pay attention. So people would be like, "Do you remember what was said in class?" And I'd be like, "No, I definitely do not." Or even, even when I was studying emergency medicine, I have such a big interest in the medical field, but when I was sitting in class and when I was learning like the boring stuff like anatomy and whatnot, I just could not get myself to focus. And back then, when I didn't know about MD, I thought I was just tired. So I kept buying energy drinks, which, of course, made it worse. So yeah, I don't recommend buying energy drinks for that because my brain was just like, oh, well, now you're hyper and you're gonna daydream, so congratulations. But yeah, no, I definitely like I agree with both of you with that. It's really interesting how it's like how the brain is choosing what to focus on and what information is important and all that type of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, like I don't know if it's like an ADHD thing or if it's just because that's how I function or if it's because of my maladaptive daydreaming, but I just found school really difficult, especially like interacting with people, but mostly like the classes. So I was super good in drama, super invested in all like the drama extracurriculars. When it came to English, I was super invested, got nominated for like this English award. But then when it came to like math and science and stuff, I would just completely like zone out and I wouldn't care. I wouldn't put any mind to it really. Like even in history, I loved history, but still, whenever we'd talk about something like that didn't interest me, I would just not remember a single thing because I was not focusing at all. But I don't know, I just like I picked and choose what I would like pay attention to, and everything else was just like, huh? I don't remember anything you taught me these past 5 months.
I was kind of the same, not exactly. I was a fantastic student in most areas. And I think that was directly because of my daydream, because it was feeding it. You know, all the English and literature classes and stuff, not only is reading fun, enjoyable, and imaginative, but it also, back then I was like, I can learn how to write my stories on paper. So I found like those classes interesting. I loved geography and history, and I did well in those classes because again, they're stories, they're true stories. Well, for the most part. But there's also a tale there and interesting things that can trigger or be incorporated. And of course, back then I didn't realize that this was what was happening because I didn't really recognize my daydreaming for what it was. But the only thing that I absolutely could not do was math. There was, and I think part of that is because there was just kind of no way for me to incorporate math as some kind of daydreaming thing. Like it didn't factor into my daydream, so it couldn't be used as trigger material. It wasn't teaching me how to express my daydreams creatively, so I just wasn't interested. I also find it really intimidating, so it was probably again like a stress trigger. Math, I still can't do math. I'm actually comically bad. Like it's absurd how bad I am
Same.
at math.
Yeah, I just remembered, what grade was it? I think it was grade 10 or something. I was sitting in drama class and I'm sitting in the corner, and my drama teacher goes, "Okay, everyone, go into your groups. You are going to make a summative project." So it was supposed to be a 10-minute scene with one monologue for each person, and it had to be fully memorized. And I went, "I'm going to do the whole thing myself." And my teacher went, "Excuse me? A summative project that has to do with like characters interacting with other characters. You're going to do that all yourself." And I was like, "Yep." So I spent almost the entire time, the entire week, just sitting there in the corner zoning out to music, and then typing, and then zoning out, and then randomly getting up and acting out these scenes, and then going back and writing. And my teacher was just I confused because I was just talking to myself, zoning out, going by music, and I went up on stage. My presentation was 30 minutes long. I had about 3 monologues, and all of it was fully memorized. I was talking to myself the whole time, and I had this mop that was supposed to be this other character. So I was literally talking to a broom and a mop as if they were real people, and everyone loved it because it was so immersive, even though the whole time I was talking to these inanimate objects and myself and doing all these crazy things. I don't know, it's just my maladaptive daydreaming really made me into this creative person at school that everyone knew that I was this amazing writer, this amazing actor, and I would go up on stage and do crazy things, but it's because I would daydream it. I would see it in my head and I would go, okay, I'm going to reenact that. And I didn't need anyone else because all I needed was the characters in my head. So I don't know. It's funny to look back on that because I'm like, yep, that was my maladaptive daydreaming.
I actually have something to add to that. It's so strange to me, but I also did drama in high school, and I'm a very, very introverted person. I don't like being around people, and I like being on my own. And I wouldn't say I'm shy, but I'm just not a people's person. I like my own space. But drama was extremely easy for me as well, especially the live performances and being on stages and stuff like that, because for me it was exceptionally easy to become a character, to become a different character. I remember I played a villain once and there was an issue with one of the props. It was this fake wall thing that I was standing in front of, and it sort of fell over. And everyone on the stage was freaking out, oh no, it's falling. And I was just in character, not caring about it. It hit the floor and made a large ruckus. And I was just so anyway, moving on. So I'm actually wondering how easy it is for maladaptive daydreamers to just sort of, play out those characters just because we do it so much in our minds. It's, I don't know. For me, it's exceptionally easy to, I don't want to say become a character, but to act out a character just because it's always this repeated thing in my mind. So yeah, it's just something interesting that I thought of.
I absolutely not. No, stage fright. I could never ever get up on stage. I skipped science fairs. Science fairs. I would not show up for. There's absolutely no way you would ever get me acting or presenting in front of anyone. But but I will say, even though I could never ever do something like drama, I do have friends that did, and they would have me read opposite them for scripts, to practice their lines. And I do remember getting compliments from them, because when I could never get in front of an audience, but when it's just me helping out a friend by reading lines in the privacy of a bedroom, they were like, oh my God, you are so much better at this than the person I'm actually acting in this with. I don't know if they were just being nice or if I do have some sort of natural ability that I just don't have the confidence to express. But yeah, that happened. There's only one more thing in this section that I kind of want to touch on, and that's that one subgroup of participants described an utter loss of control. No coping method worked. They described it as a nagging in your head that you should be daydreaming. Your mind doesn't feel fully relaxed unless you daydream. So trying to control it has never gone well.
So actually, I was reading a bit forward, and I also wanted to touch on this where A bit further down, it says these individuals describe a powerful sense of yearning for daydreaming that is in line with reports about craving and addiction, which again brings me back to the previous points that I made with the whole addiction thing. But it's interesting because I'm thinking about times where I couldn't daydream. For example, going to a friend's 21st for a weekend where I would get so like internally agitated just because I couldn't daydream. I mean, of course, it's different to what's being described in the paper. In the paper, they're saying, regardless of what external forces people engage with, they're still going to daydream. But I do understand that feeling of really wanting to daydream. And yes, it's interesting that people differ like that. It's like some people really, 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 really want to daydream, where others can be influenced by being distracted. So for me personally, it's just I get this weird internal itch. Like I feel very uncomfortable. I can sort of, I don't know if anyone here has claustrophobia, but I have it a bit where when I'm in tight spaces, I become a little agitated. I'm freaking out a little. So it's the same feeling as that, not being able to daydream. But again, I'm not someone who has to daydream all the time, and I do have external forces, but it's just something that I do in part relate to, where it's just that nagging feeling of really needing to daydream.
Yeah, with me, I don't think I've ever stopped daydreaming. I've never found ways of like coping or making it stop. It's mostly just like actual things like in the way of me daydreaming. So for example, like when I lived with that girl for a few months, I couldn't daydream. And, if I have a busy day or I'm traveling or doing this and that, like I won't daydream because I can't. But as soon as I can, I do it, and I haven't found a way to really stop. I try to go by a routine, so I'll try to split it up. Like I'll daydream in the morning and then I'll daydream a little bit at night, but in the middle of the day I won't do anything. And sometimes that helps, but I have to incorporate daydreaming or else I will just lose my mind. Like my mind just goes in every direction in like the span of 1 second.
I feel like I'm in this quote. Like daydreaming for me, it never turns off. I'm almost never not half present. Like it's always sitting right behind my eyes. It just kind of is faded out while other things come into focus. While I'm focused on other things, it backs off, but it is always right there. And it will swim up whenever it gets the chance. And I kind of have to push it back down. So I feel like that subgroup there is my people.
Yeah, I feel that as well. Like with the racing thoughts 24/7, like I'm just always thinking of multiple things and seeing things in my head. Like it never goes away. It's just, I don't know. There's sessions where I will go into my bed and I will rock back and forth and I will have these pretty awesome daydreams. But then there's like the other daydreaming, which is just doing everyday tasks and zoning out and talking to people and zoning out, and it just constantly is happening throughout the day. There's just different versions of it.
So that's it for part 1 of this episode of Parallel Lives. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to subscribe to the podcast, like the episodes if you can, depending on what platform you're on. Check out other platforms if you want to.
We're on YouTube, Spotify, Pocket Cast, Google, Apple. We're on a bunch of stuff.
And if you want to be a guest on the podcast, if you want to join in on the conversation, or if you just want to sit in live and listen to when we record these episodes, then feel free to join the Discord server and give yourself the podcast role. And then you will get pinged whenever we have new episodes coming out, new ideas, when we're looking for people, and when we'll record. So yeah, that is it from us. Thanks again for listening. Cheers.